Hey, Annie, thanks so much for being on the show. So I know that you are a microexpressions and negotiation expert,
Mhm.
but for those unfamiliar, what are microexpressions?
So microexpressions are these is basically the universal language of our species. It's the pre-verbal language that we're all wired with. So it has to do with really the way we're made up as human beings, that when we are nervous, our hands get cold, and that's because the blood rushes down to our legs and our feet. When we're angry, it pumps into our fists so that we can fight. We have a biological reaction to each emotion. And microexpressions are that biological reaction on our faces. And every feeling has a specific change in blood flow and muscle movement in our bodies and on our faces. And the micro expressions is the little fleeting, that's disgust, discomfort, that's anger, sadness, contempt, is a little tiny fleeting, it can be emotion that shows up on our face. It can be up to a 25th of a second. And when babies are little, they make the big facial expressions. We call those macro expressions, and they last for a second up to about 4 seconds. And the micro expressions are really leakage of the feelings, and we can't stop ourselves from making those expressions. They actually come before the thought process.
Interesting.
You're
So we'll
like,
talk
I'm trying
about a
not to
little bit
make
later
micro
on how
expressions.
this impacts. I'm like straight face. So we'll talk about
That's
how
fear.
this
That's fear.
impacts negotiation, but I want to have some real life examples and then get your thoughts on basically just the image and then their micro expressions.
Yeah,
So let me go ahead
let's do it.
and share that real quick. All right. So this one, we're starting out trying to find the most challenging person to do micro expressions of Mark Zuckerberg, who's in the hot seat at the moment. Just based on this image alone, what do you take away from his micro expressions?
So this is pretty much of a baseline picture. I don't see much of an expression because the pieces of the face that I would look at are, for example, to see if he's angry. He doesn't seem to be angry. If there was anger, there'd be a tightening of the lip muscles. If he was sad, there'd be a puckering or a squeezing of the chin. It's possible that he's lifting his chin a tiny bit, which we see in pride or defiance. But I don't really see much of anything. He's not even furrowing his brow, which can be anger or deep concentration. So I just don't see anything. He's certainly not happy. He just looks like he's thinking about things, just existing.
Yeah, I was going to say, how do you negotiate with a person with a straight poker face like that, where there's literally little to no emotions on his face, most of the images you look at?
Yeah, you poke and you say something interesting, and then you shift your gaze down to the bottom of the face and see what happens. So I lived in Asia. We have some overlapping friends, I believe. That's how we got connected. And I lived in Singapore for about 9 years, Hong Kong for almost 2, and China for about half a year. And I get asked all the time, especially in the West now, oh, it must have been so difficult to negotiate in China because people really keep that steady, stable poker face. And I said, yeah, but the micro expressions are all the same. It's hardwiring. So if you make somebody mad or if they don't like, they absolutely make the micro expressions. It's how we process emotion. We make the facial expression first. It sends a message to our amygdala in our brain. And that's how we process and figure out what that feeling feels to us.
That makes sense. I like the point about poking them or prodding them just to get some kind of emotions, because even some of the interviews I've seen with Zuckerberg, like where he's still passionate, there's still not much going on with the face. So I picked him because I thought he would be the most challenging person to unravel or decipher, just
Sometimes when
because
people
there's a
are,
lack of emotions.
I don't know if has he gone out officially and said that he's on the spectrum. He presents as somebody who's likely to be on the spectrum to have some autism. There tends to be less of the macro expressions that I see sometimes with grown-ups with autism. The micro expressions still come though.
That's what I was going to lead us to the next one quite nicely, because I believe Elon has come on the record, I think on an SNL interview, and that he is on the spectrum. I think he has Asperger's.
Yeah, a lot of brilliant people are.
So taking that out of the equation, just based on, once again, Elon's image, once again, who's also in the hot seat recently, what are your thoughts on his image and the micro expressions?
This particular facial expression, he actually is showing some happiness. And happiness we see, there's a lot of ways to code it, but when we look at whether or not a smile is genuine or not, trick is in whether or not they're smile bags. And so I'll explain what that means. I used to teach facial expressions to my kids when we were living in Singapore. My kids were very little when we lived there, and we used to go out into Singapore and speak in Swedish, and I would live narrate human interaction on the buses and in the doctor's offices and at school. And I would say, okay, what do you see? What do you see? And they'd say, when the guy leans closer, she's showing some disgust or discomfort. So we would talk about the facial expressions in a variety of live human sessions. And when my daughter Emma was about 4, she said, Mama, all you have to do to see if somebody's gen is really happy is if the skin right under their eyes is fat. If it's fat, then they're happy. So it was actually with my kids that I developed my teaching techniques. And when somebody is experiencing genuine happiness, their cheeks rise up, their cheeks lose gravity. And that means that the skin underneath their eyes, where we talk about when somebody's tired, we say, oh, you have circles under your eyes. Just that area gets fat and pops out. And that's what I call smile bags. And here he's actually showing a little bit of smile bags, which is fairly rare for him in his public pictures. He often is showing a little bit of a pullback of the upper eyelids, which shows some, I would say, emotional or mental struggle.
Yeah, he's not really known for his smile or his.
No, but that's why this picture is kind of interesting, because you can actually see the balls of his cheeks rising up, and on the one side more than the other, that there's that bulge of skin sticking out right under his lower eyelids. So he looks cheerful for him.
I was gonna say cheerful. It's all relative.
Yeah.
So for him,
Totally.
he's ecstatic, but for other people, it'd be like just adorable day. Interesting. So keeping on the theme of smiles and laughter, let's bring up another one of a woman this time, Kamala Harris, US. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on this image? Now, this is very over the top. So Zuckerberg and Elon Musk are very known for no expressions, little to no expressions. What are your thoughts on this one, which is the opposite spectrum of that?
This is a little bit of an exaggerated expression. She clearly knows that she's being photographed. One of the things that I look at for a smile is whether or not, so she's got the smile bag, so there is some genuine joy-ish, but she's deepening her nasolabial furrow, so that what I call the nostril shadows, the shadows that come from just above the nostril and go stretch down to the outer corners of the lips. She's deepening that and she's wrinkling her nose. That signifies discomfort. So we show that facial expression when we're a little uncomfortable, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she's not enjoying herself too. But it seems like someone said something that she finds outrageous, and then she's probably over laughing because she's got that really wide mouth. It's funny, but it's not that funny. And there's an element of discomfort. It's just, we all act a little weird and wonky when we're being watched.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if that's, obviously you're not going to talk about politics, but you notice a lot of politicians, they have almost like the fake smile, or the tech entrepreneurs are like very still and very serious.
Almost all.
Like politicians,
yeah, especially in you're from the U.S. too, especially in our country. Yes, the thing in American politics is this over exaggeration of facial expressions. And I actually think Hillary Clinton lost the election because of her facial expression. She would do this. Yeah, she's an introvert, and she would overcompensate she would try to show excitement. And in excitement, we widen our upper and lower eyelids. We open our eye aperture, and we do this, hi, great to see you. But it's subtle. And she tries to exaggerate that facial expression. She probably has no idea what she's doing, but she does this, nice to see you. And it freaks everybody else out because she's actually showing the upper facial expression of fear. We pull our upper eyelids way back when we're showing fear. And basically what she's signaling to everybody is danger, danger, alert. So it's just exactly the wrong message if you want to connect to somebody, is to pull your upper eyelids back. And Elon Musk actually makes that facial expression a lot.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, once again, going back to the cultural difference, that's obviously a big difference between the U.S. is a little bit over-exaggerated, a little bit too animated. Yeah. And a lot of the Asian and also German politicians who are very known for the straight face.
Yeah.
Once again, like, even if I'm thinking of a specific politician who was addressing the country during COVID, and obviously COVID's a very serious situation, but there was like little to no, maybe I wasn't like paying close enough attention, but there was little to no micro expressions. It was just like as serious as a Zuckerberg face. And I've seen that time and time again across, not all, but many kind of Asian politicians.
Yes. For those of us who experience ourselves as global citizens, I was abroad for 25 years. It would be nice to land somewhere in the middle because the US, the enthusiasm and the warmth is wonderful when it's genuine. And sometimes I can feel like, I spend a lot of time in Sweden, that it's too subdued and not enough warm and friendly. And in Asia, it's just, you don't necessarily, especially in a public setting, let the world into your emotional life. The micro expressions tend to be the same, but because they are so fleeting and because they can be up to a 25th of a second, and unless you are shifting your gaze to a different part of the face, if you're making eye contact with somebody or watching their eyes, you are going to miss the micro expressions.
Yeah, and tying this back to negotiation, there's a concept of mirroring, like mirroring body language. Do you think the same thing applies in terms of mirroring micro expressions or just facial expressions in general? Yeah.
Sure. I probably should have mentioned in the beginning, for those of your listeners that are new to microexpressions, I can numerically code the 10,000 different muscle combinations in humans. This is all science. I have had the Museum of Science in Boston, which is one of the best museums for science in the world, as a client. And the difference between body language and microexpressions is that the microexpressions are sheer biology. It has nothing to do with socialization or culture or our ethnicity or where we grew up. We all make the same. All humans that have movement in their faces, that don't have facial paralysis, make the same facial expressions. Even if we're born blind and we've never seen another human face, we make the same facial expressions. So the mirroring that you're talking about is really fascinating. And if our faces are able to move, we automatically, in a face-to-face interaction, mirror each other's facial expressions because it's our mechanism for figuring out feelings and emotions. So I have to mirror your facial expressions and my brain goes, oh, this is how Joe's feeling. Oh, yeah, that must be hard, or that must be wonderful, or gosh, I wish I could feel that way too. So it's how we connect to people. And the problem with Zoom, for example, is that we disconnect. I may be watching myself and totally missing your facial expressions. Or if I'm watching your facial expressions like I am right now, you're getting the side of my face and my eyelids are down. So I have this constant struggle because I really should be looking here to face my audience, but then I can't respond to you as a human because my brain's missing your facial expressions, which my brain probably even more than other brains needs. But that mirroring is central. And if we, for example, have an elderly family member that experiences Parkinson's and loses some movement in their face because facial paralysis is one of the symptoms of advanced stages of Parkinson's, they lose some of their ability to process emotion and to figure out what people around them are feeling because they can't move their face to get that process started. So Botox does that too.
Yeah. I guess my wife this is a personal anecdote. My wife has recommended I get Botox because I tend to have a natural scowl.
Those are your thinking muscles. You need your thinking muscles because you don't want to stop yourself from thinking. You do a lot of problem solving, Joe. You don't want to turn off your ability to problem solve. That's how you feed your family.
Yes,
she should love those muscles. She should love those muscles. Should. Tell her that if you're angry and if it's a genuine scowl, your lips are going to be tight. But if your lips are loose like they are right now, you're not angry. You're just thinking.
Yes.
So that's how constantly thinking and solving and figuring out what us entrepreneurs are, right? That's the sort of the constant. We never shut it off.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
I'll say, baby, this is how I make my money.
Yeah.
You don't want to stop me from making money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Definitely doesn't want that. So we've got over kind of celebrities and things like that, but to make things fair, I thought I'd go over my mugshot, my profile pic that I use.
So fun.
You're welcome. Hey, you're welcome.
I love that you call it a mugshot. I think you sent this to me really early on. I don't remember if it was this picture or if it was another one. You said, can you tell? Yeah, I can see everything. So this is not bad. I think this is better than the one you originally sent me. So we're looking at to see whether or not the cheeks rise up in genuine joy. And you've got a little bit of a bulge and you've got some cheeks there. It's about as good as it gets because mugshots are, by definition, really horrible pictures. Unless you have a really nice connection with your photographer, it's hard. And I have one really beautiful picture of me that I actually use as my profile picture, but it's from like way, way back in the day. And the reason I look so happy is that I'm holding my baby. You have to have something that distracts you, that gets you, so that those are more likely, sort of those spontaneous pictures, likely to be better. But it's pretty good. It's not bad. I always appreciate your self-deprecating humor, so I wish I could say it was bad so you could make a funny joke.
Yeah. I was going to say, you're more than welcome to tear it apart. But no, funny you picked up, it is actually a buddy of mine who I've known for 20 years took these photos. And he was, because I tend not to show, you can pick it out, but I tend not to show a lot of emotion on my face.
Oh, but you've got a lot of warmth in your microexpressions. Yeah. But yes, you're calm with your macros. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think he picked that up.
You did a really funny thing the other day where you were giving a talk or you were on stage and you said, like, when your mom comes to your dance recital or something. I mean, it was something really funny. And it was a friend, right? And it was just,
it was a friend.
And that reminds me of, I like to watch the bloopers sometimes from TV shows that I used to watch when I was younger. And it's interesting because they laugh in the TV shows, but as soon as they break character and they see it's a blooper, it's a completely different, relaxed expression. And that was your expression when you joked about your mom coming. That was that, oh, my friend, I see you, I recognize you, I'm safe, I'm good, you're funny. This is a little awkward, but also because that mixing of the business and the personal. Yeah, no, I really
I think you picked that up because, I think you picked that up very well, because when I'm doing a talk, I tend to do, there's like the stage version of me, which is me elevated in terms of personality and emotions.
Right.
And then in that exact moment, I saw him in the very back of the crowd, and he literally had his camera and he was like waving like he was my mom. And I was like, this is just a ridiculous scenario that I have to laugh.
You just have to surrender. You like, there's no, and it perfectly, you're like, all right. Yeah. No,
I was like, all right, we're going to keep going. And it's funny to capture that.
One of my favorite things about working in Singapore was, I remember one of my clients pulling me aside and telling me that, because I'd asked him several questions that day. He was throwing this ginormous, he was in charge of Ion, the big shopping mall.
Yep.
Ion opened on Orchard Road. It was this ginormous celebration. He was in charge of running the events, the opening events. I don't remember how many millions of dollars, but it was spectacular. And he was a client of mine, and he was running around scheduling another big event. And he was going from local place to local place, right down the street from his office, saying to a local artist, he popped in and he said, yeah, I don't think we've met before, but we are going to deck out this, I can't remember if it was a hotel, but a venue. And I've always admired your art. Let's decorate the entire place. Let's put up like your real prices, not your friends and family prices, but let's deck out the entire place with all of your artwork. And I said to him, why are you doing all the local places? Like, we're going from one place to another. Why aren't you taking like the spectacular galleries that are on the big boulevards? And he said, these are my people. This is my family. In Asia, we don't differentiate between a professional self and a personal self. We are one person, and we bring our people and our family with us when we succeed. And it was such a lovely piece of Singaporean culture that just has always stayed with me. That idea that you work with your friends and you lift up your friends and your family and your people with you as you rise. I really liked that piece of collectivist society. Always made me feel like it was home. And I just thought that was so beautiful how he had this idea, because you grew up in the US like me, right? Where there's a little bit of a don't bring your friends, don't combine business and pleasure, don't work with your friends because you don't want those relationships to overlap. Imagine if something went wrong. And I loved that whenever I did a deal with a Singaporean client, we would organize to get it started right away. First of all, everything went fast, and I love that. And then it would be the weekend before, they'd say, oh, and by the way, we're hosting a dinner, and I want my kids to meet your kids, and I want to meet your spouse, and I want you to meet my wife. And there was that idea that if we're going to work together and we're going to build something together, even if it's a smaller project, we need to know who you are as a full human being. And there is no separation between a personal and between a private self and a professional self. So yes, when you're on stage, I totally get that. But I also love that piece that you just surrendered to it. You're like, this is who I am. And there's my buddy. Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, I think I'll start a quick anecdote and we'll switch back to negotiation. One thing I do when I'm picking my clients now is I have the beer or wine test. So I don't really drink much, but I ask myself, would I want to have beer or drinks with this person? If the answer is no on either part, then probably not.
Life's too short.
They don't want to take them. They don't want to take me. Exactly. So that for me is a rule of thumb that's been extremely valuable in terms of like building the business and so on. But yeah, I completely agree with you. Definitely something very Singaporean culture.
It's so
here.
nice to get to a stage in your career where you have some choices, because there are periods of your life where I would take anybody that will pay me any money.
Oh yeah,
especially when you're starting your own business.
I've definitely been in that situation. Yes, I definitely have been there.
So it's so lovely to get to a point where you just say, and I say no more often than I say yes these days. I absolutely do. And it's not necessarily because I don't like the client, but it is, maybe it just doesn't fit with my mission, my purpose, when I'm already doing that kind of work. But I prefer to work with friends. I prefer to work with people that I have an emotional connection with, and I'm lucky to be able to do that. Yeah. All right. So ask me some questions about negotiation, or if you want, I'll tell you some of the shenanigans I did in Singapore. Okay. Pupil dilation is something that I always look for. Because whenever human beings want something madly, like whenever they're really attracted to another person, or if you present a pitch where somebody goes, oh my God, that could change everything for my company. It's basically greed. So our pupils swell when we see something that we really want. And I had this client in Singapore, and I wanted equity in his company. And he didn't want to give me equity in his company, but he wanted me to do his strategic advisory. And so I just said, just give me a little percent, because I wanted the bragging rights. It was a really interesting company. And he said, no, I'll pay you whatever retainer you want. I'll pay you your fees. You can even hike it up a little bit, but I'm not giving you equity. And I said, then I'm not going to do it. And he knew I had all the connections and all the ability to, he was fairly new in Singapore. I was very well connected at that point. And I knew exactly what he needed. And he knew that because he knew several of my other clients. And we had friends in common, so he trusted me. And so he just said, no, I'm not doing this. I haven't given anybody, not even my CEO has equity. And I said, okay. So I went home and I wrote a 1-page contract, a really short contract. And I literally took it and I stuck a pen on it. And I signed it at the bottom myself. And then I stuck it in a folder. And I kept that folder in my purse for 3 weeks. And this guy was sharing office space with a client that I was with often. And I finally got a chance to go out to lunch with this guy. And I gave him some really nice compliments. And I got his pupils to dilate. And I just took the contract and I passed it over the table. I said, just sign it if you want to. And he signed it. Because the pupil dilation is almost the equivalent of getting drunk. You're just drunk with desire. And in his case, I had just complimented his ego, and it was things that I'd said that were true. He was fabulous at his job. He was one of the most creative thinkers that I've ever met, and just this brilliant man, but he had a healthy ego. So complimenting him on what a brilliant man he was absolutely just made his pupils swell. And I pushed the contract over and he signed it. And fast forward many years later, I helped him build this company, gave him some really good advice and some advisory. And I made some of the connections that ultimately led to him selling the company and making a lot of money. But I didn't tell anybody when I was living in Singapore that I knew how to code microexpressions. I only had 4 people that knew that was even a thing for me. So fast forward many years, I saw him in another country where I was visiting a mutual friend. And he said, I know what you do. I know how you did that. You were reading my microexpressions. And I said, yeah, pupil dilation. And he's, dang it, Annie, you should have told me. And I said, yeah, I did what I promised I would do. And he said, yeah, you did. So yeah, we're still friends to this day. He's a really fun guy.
I think it's great lessons, not only for professional, like I said, but for personal parents like myself who are trying to manage in that situation. So Annie, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate you sharing all your superpowers and insights with us. It's been very enlightening. And thank you guys so much for watching, listening to today's episode. So many interesting tidbits in here. You got to share it. You have to apply some of these principles yourselves. So thank you guys so much. And we'll see you on the next episode.